I'm here.
Hey, Jacqueline, welcome to
Can
Power
you?
Hour. How are you? I can, yes.
I'm speaking on behalf of my husband. He's a 61-year-old black male. He had a stroke back at the stem in June 2019. Uh, I brought him home from the rehab nursing home in September of last year. Uh, VA is doing pretty good by him, because the physical therapy, the occupational therapy in them, they don't see no improvement. They say they can't come out until he shows some type of improvement. Now he has feelings in all his limbs. He can turn his head from side to side. He's in his right mind. If you ask him a question, he'll shake his head yes or no, or he'll blink once for yes and twice for no. When he's sleeping at night, he can turn his head all the way to the left, and he stretches his legs and arms and fingers and toes, but he's not doing it voluntarily.
Okay. Okay.
And and I was just wondering, would this be something that we'll be able to work with him with?
Sure. So good questions. So thanks for that, Jacqueline. I appreciate it. So 2019 stroke. Okay. So tell me about so he was in inpatient rehab at the VA. Is that correct?
No, when he first started having, he was having many strokes. He went to VA.
Okay.
VA sent him straight to Cape Fear. I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They
Okay.
sent him
Okay.
to Cape Fear. That was on that Sunday. They was keeping him under observation, and then that Tuesday, that's when he had the major stroke,
Okay.
and he was unconscious. He was in the hospital probably about 6 weeks in ICU. The doctors talked to me and they said, you need to go ahead and make arrangements because any minute now he can go and stuff like that. They told me if he lived, he would be brain dead, he'd be a vegetable, but none of that came true, what they said. Because
So
if I listen
he's
to
a
the
tough
doctor,
one. He's a tough
yeah,
one.
if I had listened to the doctors, he'd be dead and gone. But he be in here, we watch movies together, we be telling jokes, he'll bust out laughing. And even when he go to the doctor talked to him, asked him questions and stuff like that. He had just recently got back out the hospital because the left side of his face was twitching. I thought maybe he was having another stroke. So we took him back to Cape Fear and they kept him for 6 days, did all tests, and they said everything was fine. And the doctor saw what condition he was in. He put back in for the physical and occupation therapy to come back out and work with him. But they said
Okay.
until they see some major improvement, the insurance won't going to pay, Medicare won't going to pay.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, that's a tough situation. This is common, I think, and it drives me bonkers. In terms of how the reimbursement structure is working. And again, I don't really have the time to go into the details of this. It's a bit of circular logic, right? Because the medical system won't deliver the amount of care to actually induce a change based on what we know from the science, but then they won't reimburse for the care. So it's screwy. And that's the nicest way I can say it. Let's put it that way. So that being said, you mentioned a couple of things and you had a really poignant question about, will this work for him? And the honest answer is, Jacqueline, I cannot say with any degree of certainty for any individual person that it's going to do X, Y, Z. That's not what science can tell us, right? The unfortunate thing about science is it tells us how a general stroke survivor will respond. It kind of just averages. That's the way science works, unfortunately. So with that being said, what are we left with in terms of the sort of predictability of long-term outcomes? I think one thing that we can draw inferences from, there are a lot of really great models out there about what types of things matter. Of course, being able to follow commands, really, really important. Being able to have sort of the time since stroke, while the amount of your improvement that never goes back down to zero, right? Your possibility of improvement never goes down to zero. There is a dependency on time from time since stroke. Meaning the way to think about this is, if you devote 1 hour of time, let's say 6 weeks post stroke, you may get 10x type of improvement, where X is just a unit of improvement. I'm just arbitrary numbers here. If you wind that forward to 6 years, and you do that same 1 hour of time, you may not get 10x. You may get 1x, but that doesn't mean it goes to 0, right? And so the time since stroke does matter. So you're kind of in that window where you're transitioning from subacute to chronic, which is I say the best time to start neuro rehab is now. Wherever you find yourself is now. And the other really important thing to mention is, generally speaking, people who have more movement impairments have less sort of rate of improvement than someone who has a lot more movement.
Yes.
Than someone in that case. So those are just some important things to mention. Now, with that being said, when you consider sort of what types of things are also important in the rate of improvement, or trying to make a good prediction about the improvement, there's a couple things that are really important. One of those that we've talked about many times here is sort of the dose. The amount of time, amount of active movements that you're doing are really, really important about a sort of driving those changes. Now, we don't know specifically sort of the interaction between all of those things I just discussed, the dose, but the dose is a really, really important thing. And so when unfortunately I've said this a couple of times, I say it kind of jokingly, but I'm really kind of ashamed of this, that my crystal ball that I have of making predictions about individuals is very, very cloudy. And I'm sad about that, but it's just an honest appraisal of things, right? But when we have a really cloudy ball to make predictions about, what do we do? What can we do? We take the things that we know are important and we try to maximize them. And for those cases, there's certain things that we can control, and there's certain things we can't control, right? We can't control who we are as individuals. We can't control when we have the stroke, these sort of things. But we can control the other important bits, which are we actively engaging in rehab? Are we doing that as much as we can to saturate a response to drive improvements? Are we taking care of ourselves health-wise? Do we have a good support structure? All those things are really important. And you guys kind of have the check boxes in place for the support structure, right? He's really, really fortunate to have there. I think not everyone is as fortunate as that. So, and then in terms of the rehab side, we know that generally speaking, more neuro rehab, more active movements is really, really important. And it's really, really hard to do with standard outpatient rehab, whether it's OT or PT, just because of the constraints of insurance that I'm sure you found yourselves in. And so that's why robotic systems can kind of come in, step in, and act as kind of a workforce multiplier to really get that amount of movement that we know is possible to sort of saturate those responses. And so I think about this as kind of let's try to maximize the probability of success. And that's really what we're trying to do here. We want to take whatever his maximum medical improvement is. We want to try to get ourselves to that point as quickly as possible. And we can do that by trying to take all those things that we can control and maximize them. And one of those most important things is the amount of neuro rehab that you're doing. And by nature of being a robotic system, it can kind of do that very, very efficiently with not a lot of effort.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a lot to digest. I'm sorry about that, but let me any questions for me about that?
No, it's just sometimes we'll ask him to squeeze our hand and he'll be able to squeeze it.
Sure.
And then sometimes he can't, but his nurse, the CNA that come in every morning, when she get him ready for the day, she stretches his arms out and his legs and stuff like that. Always moving them, and you can see the muscles. You can feel the muscles, and you can see them jumping sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. And that is with Lillian, and that is that the passive movements, they're good for maintaining tissue quality, right? It's making sure he's not getting contractures, right? Making sure he's not getting better. Those sort of things, really important, really, really important. But when we're talking about trying to maximize or increase the probability of successful return of some volitional activation, these sorts of things, passive stretching is not sufficient to do that. We have to be engaged in active movements, and that's really tough. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Jacqueline, I think, to be kind of bring it down to sort of brass tacks, I think when it comes to something like this, could we get it to work with his anatomy? I think we could probably get it to work with his anatomy. I think it's a very similar case to Julia earlier, right? We could probably make it work for you guys. Make sure that it works in your home. Make sure it works in these sort of situations. It's just a matter of making sure, we kind of manage our expectations about what those things are. And when we do see those improvements, we kind of latch onto them and really try to jump on it and continue the progress. So, I wish I could say definitively that yes, this would work, or no, this wouldn't work. I think both of those cases are useful for us. But it's really hard to make those judgments. But I think in those cases, Jacqueline, the best thing to do is, if you're really interested in trying to maximize that probability of success, something like this could be useful to test where those limits are, to see where we could really get to. Yeah.
Okay.